submission. Next is Annamaria La Chimia. Sorry if I don't pronounce it properly.
It's perfect.
Yeah, over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much. And I would like to share my screen as well. So I wonder if Mr. Jardine wouldn't mind stop sharing his own screen so that I can share mine. Thank you. Unfortunately, oh, okay. Thank you. And now, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you especially to the committee who has allowed us to present today. I want, first of all, I want to take this opportunity to congratulate you on the publication of the Public Procurement Bill, for the extensive work done to review and improve the existing procurement legislation, with a view to modernizing the procurement system in South Africa, making it more efficient and capable of responding to challenges of our time, in line with the principles of equity and social justice that are enshrined within the South African Constitution. And I welcome the call for public consultations of the bill, and especially I thank everyone for allowing me to present today. Today, I want to talk about the gender aspect of the bill and gender-responsive procurement. We know that the South African Constitution fully recognizes the power of procurement and explicitly delegates the legislation to use procurement to address past injustices and inequality. So the question I'm asking is whether the new bill has taken on board this unique opportunity to fully meet the constitutional obligations towards women. And I'm asking myself, does the bill in its current form provide contracting authorities with the necessary legal instruments to adequately consider gender equality within their purchasing activities? Is the bill a missed opportunity maybe to promote gender-responsive procurement within the South African procurement system and empower South African women? We have heard already the preceding two speakers mentioning equity and mentioning local content, and especially Mr. Pillai was referring to the fact that the bill in its current form risks damaging women and their entrepreneurial effort. Now, what very briefly I would like to say before looking in details at the provision of the bill is to look at what is gender procurement and why we need a broader vision than the one presented within the South Africa bill. Because of course the bill, we all know in section 17, chapter 4, section 17 does provide for the possibility to grant preferences to women-owned companies. But gender-responsive procurement is more than that and cannot be reduced to granting preference to women at the award stage. So, as myself and many others in the literature, first and foremost, and my very dear colleague, Professor Shober Williams Elegbe from the University of Stellenbosch, we have argued in many occasions that public procurement is not gender neutral, and gender blind procurement, that is procurement that neglects the gender dimension of public purchases, risk compromising gender equality, exacerbating existing inequality. So risk to causing harm to women even and non-binary person. So for example, public contracts, if they are predominantly awarded to male-owned companies, procurement could further entrench inequality within the economy and within society, undermining the efforts that the women have made. But it's also important to emphasize that gender-blind procurement can have a consequence in terms of responsibility for the procurement entity when, for example, the contractor commits acts of gender-based violence or employee of the contractor commit acts of gender-based violence. So there is really this risk that gender-blind procurement exacerbate inequalities. So there is a need for due diligence, and initial steps in this respect have been made to the Act. For example, Section 10, 11, and 13 and 16 of the Act do make some reference to due diligence. But as I will explain, and as I've explained in my written submission, these provisions, in my view, do not go far enough the way they could have done. So it is really, the bill is to be commended for the introduction of the due diligence requirement in Section 11. However, it is unclear to what extent this section covers a range of misconducts that could have a negative impact on gender equality. Furthermore, a first reading of the provision suggests that the due diligence obligations are limited to the supplier that has been awarded the contract and fall short of foreseeing a commitment to cover the entire supply chain, which is where violations linked to gender-based violence or other human rights violations are often associated. So, for example, Section 10, paragraph B of Section 10 explicitly states that a procurement official should not use their position or information obtained because of their position to gain an advantage. But it doesn't explain what that advantage is. In my view, the bill should explicitly clarify that should include any type of advantage, including sexual advantages. Section 11 should make clear that when it referred to Section 16 of the bill, this should include violation of business conduct linked to, for example, violation of labor law, violation of security law, another act of gender-based violence that the contractor and the subcontractors have not managed to address throughout the supply chain. But as I was saying, therefore, gender-responsive procurement goes beyond the traditional use of procurement to support women-owned and women-led business. So beyond the 1% that we would usually see as being able to lead a company or to own a company. Gender-responsive procurement goes beyond ownership and leadership. So in this regard, when I look at Chapter 4, Section 17 of the preferential provision, I see some limitation. In which regard? Because it lacks a vision, an holistic vision of gender procurement by looking simply at the ownership of the company. Ultimately, we need to look at procurement as a social, economic empowerment. So to this respect, we need to take a three-step approach, an approach that looks at the impact that the procurement can have on society. So the impact of what we buy on the users of the public goods and the public services. Will the purchase lead to more or less services? Are women worse affected than men by the purchase? So we need to link to gender budgeting and clarify what issues are linked specifically to procurement. Then the second step is to understand the market, how we buy, what obstacles we create when procuring. Are we outsourcing? Are we buying through competitive tender? Are we using negotiating procedures? Are we inviting women-owned companies in this negotiated procedure? Are we making sure that the setup of the procedure does not hamper women? Are we providing adequate time for bidding? Are the qualification requirements too restricting? These are all issues that go beyond the simple preferential treatment, but they can cause obstacles to to the participation of women, women-owned company, or companies that have a majority of women in their workforce. And who we buy from. That is when we look at the ownership, the leadership of the company, but also we should look at the composition of the workforce. And we should also look at and reward companies that give better working conditions to women. So in this regard, there are some limitations in the bill that I see that go beyond just looking at Section 17 of the bill. For example, definition of gender. We need a broad notion beyond the binary construction of gender. We need a definition of women-owned companies and woman-led companies. We need a definition that embraces the workforce. We need a clear attention and explicit reference to intersectionality so that the criteria, the procurement authority cannot just pick and choose between the criteria, but needs to take careful consideration to the various elements, to the various characteristics that women experience. And then finally, we need data. At the moment, data is quite limited, but there is a specific section on data, so I will return to that. So I was saying Section 17 at the moment is the only provision that fully would be able to take into consideration gender-responsive procurement, yet at the same time, I believe this provision is limited. We need to include clear guidance on the minimum level of preferences. Preferences and set aside should not be limited to women-owned and women-led companies, but should include consideration of broader gender issues. For example, should take into account the composition of the workforce. And in this respect, what I've written in my written submission is that maybe we should foresee a system where we enable scaled up preferences depending on the sector where the authority and the supplier operates. And so the sectors that have fewer presence of women-owned and women-led companies or fewer presence of women in the workforce should be granted higher preferences to make sure that we can encourage and support the efforts of those women that are present on the market. And of course, I know that this can be further specified in the regulation, but as many before me have already emphasized, it would be important to make sure that the legislation already gives clear indication, clear guidance about this. Preferences and set aside should not be limited to women-owned and women-led companies, as I was saying, but we should also look at the policies that the companies are implemented to promote, to defend, to protect women. And finally, preferential provision should also include measures linked to social security consideration, especially when we look at foreign companies, for example. And this, I know, is an issue that is often overlooked. Now, other amendments in the Act, for example, I envisage could be beneficial when we look at Chapter 5, and I'm aware that I've got only 2 minutes left, so I'll try to be very quick on this point. But when we look at Chapter 5, for example, of the Act in Section 25, when we talk about the use of technology, the bill is surely to be commended for the fact that it includes a requirement to analyze and publish data. However, the bill falls short of committing public authorities to collect, analyze, and publish gender disaggregated data. So in this respect, I believe that we really need to collect gender disaggregated data on both the users and the impact of the procurement and on the procurement cycle. So I return to that idea that when we look at gender-responsive procurement, we no longer and not simply look at who we buy from, but we look also at the effects that the procurement, that what we buy has on the market. So who is using the public good that we're buying? Who is using the public service that we're buying? We need data, we need information on that as well. And finally, we need clear information on the procurement cycle. And what I mean by that, I mean that we need to go beyond looking simply at who is awarded the contract, but we need data on the market composition, on the participation of the tender. So we need to identify, are women-owned and women-led companies or companies with the majority of the workforce as women participating to a public tender? Or if we look at participation, we will be able to identify if the problem is in the market, if the problem is in the fact that we don't manage to attract woman participation within the public marketplace, or if we need to enhance capacities of women to participate. Yes, I'll conclude, absolutely. And then we need data on the award of the contract. And then finally, and I keep here, just one final thing on the dispute resolution, chapter 16, and the composition of the tribunal. I think it's very important that the tribunal, that the bill specifies and should be amended for adding an explicit commitment to diversity and inclusion. At the moment, the bill just talks about the professionalization of the members of the tribunal and their competence, but it doesn't say anything about being representative of the diverse community that is the South African community. And I think that this is very, very important. And with this, I apologize for taking a little bit more time, and I thank you very much for giving me this possibility and chance to talk about gender-responsive procurement in South Africa and the bill. Congratulations for the effort, and I very much hope to be able to follow the progress of the bill. And thank you very much for giving me this chance to talk. If you have any questions, this is my email address. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Prof Annamaria La Chimia, for your submission. Thanks very much. Let's move